She watched him walk out of the shed with a lug wrench in his fist, and for the rest of her long life she would tell it the same way. The human did not look angry. He looked tired. Tired was worse. He was a bent old wheelwright with grease black under his nails and a limp that dragged his left boot half a beat behind the right. 3 warhounds of the Skarnvoth raiding host were already in the market square, and there were 40 more coming behind them. He was, by any honest measure, a dead man in a dirty coat. A 12-year-old orc girl named Kech, watching from the alley, knew this the way she knew her own name. She had made peace with it. But when the sun set that day over the frontier moon Ostrich Tour, the market square was full of dead raiders and one very tired old man, and only 3 names remained in a ledger that no living soul but him had ever read. 6 hours earlier, none of it had begun. 6 hours earlier, the air in the wheelwright's shed had smelled of pine tar, hot copper, and old lamp oil, and a small orc girl had been standing in the doorway with a splintered pushcart, trying not to cry. She had rehearsed the lie the whole way down the hill. She meant to say the axle had cracked on a rut, and would he be so kind as to look at it, please, because her mother was ill and the cart carried the medicine, and she could pay in salt fish, half now and half at moonrise. She had practiced the words in her clicking heart tongue, and in the flat trade cant the collar around her throat would flatten them into, and she had rubbed the tears off her face at the last corner, because the matriarch had told her that tears were a weapon a Vorathar spent only on purpose, and never on strangers. None of it survived the doorway. The old human was sitting on a low 3-legged stool with a broken hub in his lap. He did not look up. He turned the hub in his hands the way a priest turns a relic and set it aside on a strip of clean cloth. Then he lifted his head, and Kek saw the eyes for the first time, and her rehearsed lie went out of her like breath in cold air. The moon Ostrich Tour had 2 suns and no seasons anyone counted the way Earth counted, but the settlers had brought their own words with them, and the word for what the old wheelwright had done for the last 2 winters was silence. He had not spoken, not to the drovers who brought him iron, not to the widow who left him bread each 7th day, not to the priest of the shivering saint who came once a month to ask if he wanted last rites and left every time with the same answer, which was no answer at all. The settlers of the moon had a shrug they used for him. Broken, they said. War took his voice. Leave him be. Kech had heard the shrug. She had not believed it, because she was 12 and her matriarch had taught her that a mute predator is still a predator, and this human smelled of grease and pine tar and something else her nose had no word for. She had come because he was the only wheelwright who could patch the cart before nightfall, and because everyone else in the market square would already be closing their shutters against what was coming down the north road. She had come because he was the last shop that would take her. She had not expected him to look at her. She had not expected him, when he looked, to be looking through her. He set the broken hub aside. He put his hands flat on his thighs. He said, in her own clicking hearth tongue, in the register a mother used to a hurt child, "Bring it here. Let me see it." The trade collar around her neck heated the way it always heated when it tried and failed to translate something the wearer already understood. She had never heard a human speak Vorathar. She had never heard any species speak Vorathar who was not born under the 2 moons of Zulmuri. The vowels set in the mouth rang for off-world throats. The clicks were made against the roof of the mouth with the tongue laid flat, and no soft-mouthed alien could ever get them right. He got them right. He had in fact gotten them very right, and had also used the diminutive her matriarch had used on her when she was small enough to carry, which was a word the trade collar could not have taught him, because it was a word only mothers of the Zulmuri line were allowed to speak. Kech stood in the doorway with her broken cart. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She sat down on the ground and began, very quietly, to cry. He let her. He did not stand up. He did not come to her. He watched her cry with the same patient attention he had given the broken hub, and when she was done, he handed her a rag that smelled of pine tar, and said, in the flat trade cant now, so she could understand the whole shape of the sentence, "You didn't crack that axle on a rut." Somebody hit it with a maul. Who? She had crossed half a moon lying about that. She had told the sentries at the north gate a story about a rut. She had told the drovers by the well a story about a wheelwright. She had spent the whole walk down the hill polishing the story about her mother and the medicine. She did not use any of those stories now. They came at first light, she said, and the trade cant made the words small and hollow and true. The Skanvoth Ozulrum's banner, green teeth on black. They took the North Farms. My matriarch sent me to buy an hour. The old wheelwright's hands were still flat on his thighs. He was looking at the coat hung on the peg behind her. It was a plain oil-stained coat with a name stitched on the breast. She had read the name when she came in. She had not thought anything of it, because human names sounded like tools falling off a cart. The stitching read plainly, Jed Ford. An hour to do what, he said. To run, Keck said. To die. He nodded once. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem afraid. He said, "Bring the cart." She dragged it in. He worked in silence. His hands were old and cracked and moved with the offhand certainty of a craftsman who no longer had to look at what he was doing, and while he worked, he asked her questions in her own tongue, one at a time, the way a healer asks a wound. How many riders? What banners? How many warhounds? Did the warhounds wear the black glass or the green? Did the outriders carry plasma glaives or bone axes? Did she see the mark of an eye burned into the chest of the tall one at the front? And if so, was the eye open or closed? She answered because she could not stop answering. Every answer he took, he set down carefully somewhere behind his own eyes. The cart was fixed in 20 minutes. He wiped his hands on the rag. He handed the rag back to her, tarside folded in. He looked at her a long moment, and then, without any change of tone, he said, "Keck, that's not your true name." "No," she said. "Say it," he said, "just once. I won't say it back. I know the rule." She had never spoken her true name to anyone who was not Vorathar. The matriarch would have skinned her for it. She said it anyway. 3 clicks and a low bell. It came out of her chest without asking permission. He closed his eyes. He was quiet for a while. When he opened them again, he stood up. His left knee popped like a green stick in a fire. He crossed to the wall and lifted down the oil-stained coat. He put it on. "Wait here," he said in her tongue. "They will kill you," she said. He was looking for something on the workbench. He found it. It was a lug wrench, iron, as long as her forearm, worn smooth in the middle by an old man's grip. "They will try," he said. He walked to the door. He put a hand on the frame. He turned his head just enough to see her from the corner of his eye, and now, for the first time, she saw the thing under the mute wheelwright's face. It was not a warm thing, it was not a cold thing either. It was the flat patience her own matriarch reserved for predators, and it looked back at her out of a human's face, and Keck understood with a lurch in her stomach that she had walked into a shed on the edge of a doomed market to ask a very tired monster to be young again for 1 more hour. "Bar the door behind me," Jed Ford said. "If I don't come back, break the west window and run north. There's a woodcutter's road behind the pines. It's not on any map. Take it." Then he was gone. She barred the door. She did not run north. She climbed the loft ladder and pushed open the shutter a hand's width and put her eye to the crack, because she was 12 years old and last runner of Clan Zulmuri, and her matriarch had taught her that if a Vorathar was going to die, a Vorathar was going to see. The market square was already emptying. The stalls were shut. The little bells over the doors were still. In the middle of the square, 3 Skanvoth outriders had halted their beasts and were laughing at a bent old human who had walked into the open with a piece of iron in his fist. The tallest of the 3 swung down from his saddle. He was 7 feet at the shoulder and armored in overlapping plates of black glass grown from a living reef. He wore the mark of the burned eye on his chest, and the eye was open. He drew a plasma glaive from a spine sheath, and the air along the blade rippled with heat. Keck had seen a plasma glaive before. She had seen what a plasma glaive did to a Vorathar in unarmored leathers. She had seen what it did to armored ones. She closed her fingers on the shutter and prepared herself to watch a bent old human come apart in the street. The Skarnvoth outrider said something in his own snapping tongue. The trade broadcast caught it and put it out over the market. "Little grandfather, go home, die in your bed." Jed Ford walked at him. He did not stop. He did not speak. There was, Keck realized much later, a specific way his shoulders had come down. The bend was gone. The limp was still there, but the limp had become the pivot. The old Wheelwright had put down the mute Wheelwright somewhere behind him in the shed, and what walked at the raider now was somebody else. The outrider swung, the plasma glaive came down in a bright arc that would have taken a Vorothar warrior in half. Jed Ford did not step back. He stepped in. He stepped inside the arc of the swing, close enough that Kecking could not see the glaive anymore because the outrider's own body blocked it, and he brought the lug wrench up in a short, ugly, offhand motion, and he drove the head of the wrench into the seam under the outrider's jaw where the black glass plates met the softer collar armor. There was a wet sound. The outrider's knees went. He fell in one piece, which was worse to look at than falling in two. The market was very quiet. The second outrider fired. He fired a plasma repeater from the saddle. Keck saw two bright bolts hit the old Wheelwright square in the ribs and pass through his coat in twin steam clouds that smelled of burned wool and burned meat. Jed Ford grunted. He did not fall. He kept walking. He reached over his shoulder with his free hand and lifted a heavy, long-barreled rifle from the sling under his coat, and he shot the second outrider once through the chest. There was no bright bolt. There was no plasma flare. There was a short, low, businesslike thump that Keck felt through the floorboards of the loft. The outrider's shield generator, which had made a bubble of blue light around him at the first sign of a weapon, did not stop what came through it. The tungsten round from the old rifle did not care about the bubble. It went through the shield, through the black glass under it, through the outrider, through the saddle, and buried itself 2 hands deep in the timber of the well behind him. The outrider fell off his mount without a sound. The third outrider did what any sane creature would do. He wheeled his beast and ran. He got 60 paces down the north road before the old Wheelwright shouldered the rifle again, and the shot took him between the shoulder blades and out through the chest. He rolled from the saddle and did not get up. Jed Ford lowered the rifle. He looked at the 2 dead raiders in the square. He looked at the wet lug wrench in his other hand. He looked, without hurrying, up at the loft window where Keck's eye was pressed to the crack. He said, in her tongue, softly, "I told you to bar the door." "I did," Keck whispered. "I know," he said. "I wanted to see if you'd watch." He came back inside. She unbarred the door for him. He set the wrench on the workbench and the rifle on its pegs and pulled his coat open and looked, without much interest, at the 2 black-rimmed holes in his ribs. The skin under the holes was raw and wet and would leave a scar, but was not, she saw, bleeding the way a wound like that should bleed. The coat was smoking a little around the edges. "Kevlar weave, ceramic plate, Terran make," he said, catching her look, "rated for caliber 50. Plasma is louder, but a piece of soft copper going fast is worse." She did not know what any of that meant. She stared at him. He said, "Sit down, little Belle. I'm going to say some things I have not said to anybody for 11 winters, and you're going to hear them because there isn't time to say them twice." She sat down. He sat down across from her. He was old again, all at once. The predator had gone back into the shed, but his eyes were still awake, and he looked at her the way her matriarch had looked at her the day she was born, which was without love and without cruelty, the way a wheelwright looks at a wheel. 11 winters ago, Jed Ford said, on the far side of this same sky, a company of 35 Skarnvoth outriders burned a place called Meridian Hollow. They burned the crops. They burned the barns. They burned my daughter's husband. They burned my daughter. They burned my daughter's child, who was called Ruth after her grandmother. I was 3 days out on a hauling contract, and the first I knew was the smoke on the horizon. When I came home, there was nothing there to bury." He stopped. He did not look away. "I sat in the ash of my daughter's house for a night and a day," he said. In the morning I got up and I went hunting. That was 11 winters ago. Since then, 32 of those 35 have died in a ledger only I keep. Some of them died in bars on frontier moons. Some in the back rooms of gambling halls. One in a bath, one in a chapel. 2 on the trade road between here and the throat. I am not proud of it. I did it anyway. Keck watched him. She did not breathe. 3 names are left in the ledger, Jedford said. One of them rode into your market this morning under a green teeth banner. He is dead in the street now. The other 2 ride with Ozul Rune himself, who keeps a hall of black glass above the ice fields of the moon your people call the throat. They think I am dead. They have thought that for 11 winters, because I let them think it. It was easier that way. I could take one at a time, quiet, nobody watching. He looked at his hands. But your matriarch sent a 12-year-old down a hill this morning to buy an hour, he said. And I do not, as it turns out, have another 11 winters in me, so I am going to close the ledger this week, all 3 names, and I am telling you this, little Bell, because you are going to run out that door in a minute, and you are going to tell your matriarch that the mute Wheelwright of Ostric Thur is going to walk north tonight to kill a warlord in a floating hall, and she is going to have to decide before moonrise whether her clan runs with him or dies waiting. Keck stared at him. Why me, she said. Because you asked, said Jedford, and because I owe you a kind of favor I never got to pay. He would not say more about that, she asked twice. He shook his head twice. He got up and began, methodically, to pack a canvas satchel from shelves along the back wall of the shed. He pulled down small, boring, terrible things, a box of long tungsten rounds, a field cautery iron, a folded square of the same weave his coat was made of, 2 field bars wrapped in wax paper, a little tin of coffee grounds, which he tucked in the innermost pocket of the coat over his heart without ceremony. He handed her a folded slip of paper. She could not read the Terran script, but she recognized the shape of a map. Woodcutter's Road, he said. West window. Now. She went to the window. She looked back at him. She said, "What do I tell her about you?" He thought about it a moment. "Tell her," he said, "that a very tired man in a dirty coat says he can give her clan 3 days. If she runs north during those 3 days, she runs. If she does not, she dies with her feet planted, which is the older way, and I will not argue with it, because I did that once too." Keck nodded once. She went out the west window. She ran north. She did not look back until she was in the pines, and by then the market square was already burning. She would not see the old wheelwright again for 6 days. She would spend those 6 days telling her matriarch a story that her matriarch did not believe, until a woman came out of the North Road on foot, a Skarnvat outrider of the 2nd rank, alive but with the mark of the burned eye scraped off her chest with a hot knife, and she stood before the matriarch of Zulmuri and said, without preamble, "Ozul Rune is dead, his hall is ash, the one who killed him is a small human with a limp and no words, and he says he will not wash windows." The matriarch of Zulmuri looked for a long time at Keck. She said, "Go find him, bring him home. 6 days. To understand the 6 days, you had to understand the whole. And to understand the whole, you had to understand what had been in Jedford's shed the whole time Keck had been in the doorway, and what the mute wheelwright of Ostric Thur had done in the 11 winters since Meridian Hollow. There is a file in a locked drawer on a station orbiting Terra. The file is stamped with a code the trade caller cannot read, and its cover sheet reads in 3 languages, "Do not declassify." The file's opening page shows a picture of a lean young man with a soft mouth and hard eyes standing in a field of yellow grass in front of a squat farmhouse. He is holding a wrench in one hand and the collar of a black dog in the other. The dog's name is written under the picture in the same neat printing that the rest of the file uses. Everything in the file is written in that same printing, and it is the handwriting of a woman named Ruth Ford, who worked for 23 years as a records clerk in the archives of the extrasolar colonial militia, and who had, quietly and without asking permission, made a copy of her son-in-law's service record and hidden it in her kitchen drawer under the good silver. She did that because she was his mother-in-law and because she loved him, and because the militia had wanted, very badly, to wipe the file clean the day Meridian Hollow burned. The record began with a boy from a heavy gravity colony called Rilkard's Reach, which was 1,7 gravities and salted the drinking water with iron, and which produced human beings with bones like sedimentary rock and hearts twice the size of Standard. It moved to the militia at 17. It moved to a specialist company called the Cold Well by 21. It moved to a classified list at 24. From 24 to 29, there were only dates and place names and a running column of numbers that Ruth Ford, in the margins, had translated for herself into a single word, over and over, in small penciled letters: kills, kills, kills. At 29, there was a discharge, honorable. Reason, family. He had come home to marry a girl named Sarah, and he had put down the rifle, and he had bought a wheelwright's shop in Meridian Hollow, because his grandfather had been a wheelwright, and it was the only work Jed had ever wanted to do that was not war. He had done it for 6 years. He had been happy for 6 years. Ruth Ford had written that word in the margin too, happy, underlined once. She had underlined nothing else in the file. Then Meridian Hollow burned. The militia's official account said that Jed Ford, retired specialist, had been located 3 weeks after the raid, drunk in a spaceport bar on a moon called Pelamet, and that he had been formally discharged from further service and quietly forgotten. That was the last line of the militia file. It was also a lie. Ruth Ford knew it was a lie because Jed had come to her kitchen door the night after the raid, sober as a stone, and he had eaten a plate of eggs standing up and drunk 1 cup of black coffee and put the mug down carefully in the sink. And he had said, "I'm going to be gone a while, Ma." "For how long?" she had said. "Until the ledger's done," he had said. "How many names on it?" she had said. 35, he had said. She had walked him to the door. She had put her hand on his cheek. She had said, "You bring my grandbaby's face home with you when you're done." He had said, "I will." Then he had gone. She had, from that day forward, set 2 cups on the kitchen table every morning. She poured coffee into both. She drank one. The other sat until the coffee went cold, and then she poured it out into the sink and washed the cup and dried the cup and set it back on the shelf. She did this for 11 winters. She did it because she believed her son-in-law would come home when the ledger was done, and she wanted him to know, when he came, that she had never once given up his chair. She did not know that the ledger had 32 names crossed out of it, or that the last 3 were riding under a green teeth banner into a market on a moon called Ostrich Thur, where the local settlers had begun to call her son-in-law the mute wheelwright, and to leave him alone. She did not know any of this because her son-in-law had chosen, very deliberately, that she should not know. He had chosen it because the last thing he had said to his daughter Sarah the morning of the day she died had been, "Take care of your mother," and he had meant it, and one of the ways he took care of Ruth was by making sure she did not have to picture what her son-in-law was doing when he was not in her kitchen. Which is why, on the morning after Ozelrun died in a hall of black glass above the ice fields of the throat, Ruth Ford set 2 cups on the kitchen table without knowing why, and the second cup filled itself all the way to the rim and did not go cold. But that was the end. The middle is what you want. The middle went like this. Jed Ford walked out of the wheelwright's shed with a satchel over his shoulder and a lug wrench in his belt, and he did not look at the 2 dead outriders in the square. He walked to the north edge of the market where the raider column had halted, and he stood in the middle of the road and waited. The column was 30 riders and 8 warhounds. The lead rider was a Skarnvoth captain with the mark of the burned eye closed, which meant he was one of Ozelrun's inner banner. The captain rode forward, saw the human in the road, saw the dead outriders behind him, and did the thing Skarnvoth captains had been doing wrong for 11 winters. He decided that the mute wheelwright of Ostrich Thur was a curiosity, and that a curiosity should be taken alive, and that his warlord would enjoy watching a human broken slowly for insulting the banner of the green teeth. He raised his hand. He shouted the order to capture, not kill. Jed Ford, standing alone in the road with an empty rifle and a piece of iron in his belt, listened to the order and let a very small smile move the corner of his mouth. It was the first smile his face had made in 2 winters. Keck, from the pines 2 miles north, with her matriarch's runner, would not see it. Nobody would see it, but it happened. Then the column came at him, and the wheelwright of Ostrich Thur went to work. He had reloaded the rifle in the walk between the shed and the road. He put 9 tungsten rounds into 9 chests before the front warhounds were on him. The chests were behind shields. The chests came apart anyway. When the warhounds arrived, he was already moving off the road into the drainage ditch, because a warhound at full charge cannot pivot in a ditch, and he took the first warhound under the throat with the lug wrench as it went past. The second warhound tried to stop. Its handler shouted for it to leap the ditch. It leapt. He put a tungsten round into it in mid-air. It came down on the far side in 3 pieces. The captain, watching this, revised his order. He shouted for kill, not capture. It was too late. By the time the sun was a hand's width above the western hill, Jed Ford was walking north out of the market square with 3 warhounds on leads behind him, because Skarnvoth warhounds are pack animals and will follow whoever most recently spoke the Alpha's command. And Jed had said it in the Skarnvoth master tongue in the correct pitch, which he had learned in a place he did not intend to mention to Keck. There were 22 dead raiders in the road behind him. 8, including the captain, had run. He walked north. Keck watched him come up out of the pines with the 3 warhounds and the empty rifle, and she came out from behind her matriarch's runner and stood in the road in front of him, and she said, without any greeting, "I am coming with you." "No," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're 12, he said. "I am the last runner of the Vorathar clan Zulmuri," she said. "My matriarch bade me bring you home when the ledger closed. I cannot bring you home if I do not know where you go." He looked at her a long moment. He said, "Little Belle, what I am about to do is not for a 12-year-old to see." "I have already seen it once today," she said. I did not look away. That was true. He nodded once. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do what I say. If I go down, run west, not north. West to the pines. Not east, not south, not back the way we came. West, say it. West," she said. "Good," he said. They went north. The 3 warhounds went with them. The runner of Zalmuri went home to tell the matriarch what she had seen. Behind them, the market square of Ostrich Thur burned, but the settlers were already leading their livestock down the woodcutter's road, and Keck's matriarch, who had been given 3 days by a very tired man in a dirty coat, gave the order to load the carts and move at moonrise. Not one clan child of Zulmuri died in the days that followed. This mattered later, and it mattered now, because as Jed Ford walked north with a small orc girl at his heels, he did the math in his head of what he had bought and what he had spent to buy it, and he decided that the price was fair. The road north out of Ostrich Thur ran through 9 days of hard country to the launch fields at Cold Rill, and from Cold Rill it was 3 jumps by short hop lifter to the moon called the Throat, and above the Throat there was a hall of black glass held aloft on gravity coils by a warlord who had never, in his entire war career, come down to fight on the same ground as his enemies. They did the 9 days in 6. They did the 6 days on very little sleep. On the 2nd day, at a way station where the road crossed a frozen creek, they were met by 3 riders under a black flag with no device on it, and Jed shot 2 of them off their mounts at 100 paces with the rifle and asked the 3rd in the Skarnvoth master tongue who had sent him. The 3rd rider was a thin Skarnvoth outrider named Ves, and Ves said the warlord had put a bounty on the road and any human traveling north was to be brought back alive. "How much?" said Jed. Weight in salt, said Ves. That's cheap, said Jed. You're old, said Ves. The warlord did not know what you were. He'll learn, said Jed. He did not shoot Ves. He took Ves's rations and his mount and his boots, and he cut the mark of the burned eye off Ves's chest with the field cautery iron heated red in the waystation stove, and he sent Ves back on foot in his underclothes with a message. The message was 5 words in the Skarnvoth master tongue. The message was, Meridian Hollow is coming home. Ves ran. Kech, watching the whole thing from beside the stove with a bowl of thin stew in her lap, understood only 2 of the words. She looked at the ceiling for a long moment. She said, You did not have to send him alive. No, said Jed. But I want him to say it aloud in Ozul Rune's hall before I get there. I want the warlord to hear the name of the town before he sees me. It matters that he hears it. It matters that he remembers, before he dies, what he did 11 winters ago that made a wheelwright walk into his floating hall with a piece of iron. Kech thought about this a while. She said, You loved them very much. He was quiet. He said, Yes. He said, Eat your stew, little Belle. She ate her stew. That night, in the loft above the waystation stove, with the 3 warhounds sleeping in a circle around her because they had decided she was the pup of the alpha now. Kech watched the old human open his coat and inspect the wound in his ribs. The wound had scabbed at the edges but was weeping in the center. He heated the small cautery iron in the stove flame and, with the offhand certainty of a craftsman handling his own worn tool, he pressed it to the deepest part of the wound. It sizzled. He did not make a sound. He did it 3 more times, once for each puckered edge, and then he wiped the iron on a rag and set it back in his kit. Kech could not look. She could not look away. Don't be dainty about it, he said, without looking at her. Just fill the hole, she said. You are not going to die. Not tonight, he said. He drank a cup of coffee. He ate a field bar. He slept for 4 hours. On the 4th hour he woke without being touched and lay very still and listened to the road. And Kech, waking beside him, listened too and heard the very faint rhythm of 6 mounts at a canter approaching from the south. Get up, he said. West window. She went out the west window. He went out the east door. He killed all 6 of them in the road at first light. When he came back in for his rifle, he had a fresh cut on his cheekbone and a limp that was worse than the old one. And Kech, who had never in her life put a hand on an adult male not of her clan, sat him down and washed the cut and packed it with the tar poultice from his own satchel, because he had put down the tarry twist and reached for the cautery iron again, and she had said, No. This one you let heal proper. He looked at her a long moment. He let her do it. He did not say anything. She said, Uncle. She said it in the trade cant because the Vorathar word for uncle was a shape a human mouth could not make. She had never called anyone uncle before. She had no uncles. Her mother had had no brothers. Her father had had no brothers. The word came out of her because it was the word that fit the shape of what he was becoming to her, and she offered it up plainly, without shame. He was quiet a long time. He said, That's a big word, little Belle. Yes, she said. You sure? He said. Yes, she said. All right, he said. They rode on. By the 5th day out, they were 3 days from the launch fields, and the road was thick with Skarnvoth patrols. Jed had taken to moving them by night through the low country off the road, and Kech, who had spent her life on a moon of open plains, learned in 3 nights how to walk in scrub without breaking sticks. On the morning of the 6th day, at a bend in a dry riverbed, they were met by a Vorathar rider on a lathered mount, and the rider was a woman Kech had never seen before, and she wore the paint of the matriarch's inner guard. Little runner, the rider said in the Hearth tongue. Your matriarch sends word, the clan is west of the pines. The clan is safe. The clan asks after the wheelwright. Kech translated for Jed. Jed nodded once. Tell the matriarch, he said, in the Hearth tongue, that the wheelwright will come to her hall when the ledger is done, and she will decide what to do with him. The rider looked at him. She had, until that moment, believed her matriarch's runner had lost her mind. Now she believed the runner had, in fact, been sent by the two sons themselves to bring a very old sort of favor home. She dismounted. She knelt in the dust. She said, in the old form, "Ancestor's guest, ride my mount." Jed shook his head. "Save it for the way back," he said. "I don't need a mount to walk into a hall." He did not ride her mount, he walked. She rode ahead of them to Cold Rill and cleared the way, and by the time they reached the launch fields, the harbor master, who was a fat old settler named Boggs, who owed the Vorathar 3 favors he did not know how to pay, had already fueled a short-hop lifter for them and asked no questions. Jed paid him in tungsten rounds anyway. He said Boggs might need them. Boggs looked at the rounds. He looked at Jed. He said, "You're that mute wheelwright from Ostrich, sir." "Not so mute anymore," said Jed. "Where are you going, friend?" said Boggs. "The throat," said Jed. "Nobody comes back from the throat, friend," said Boggs. "I know," said Jed. Boggs did not ask again. He shut the hatch on the lifter himself. He set the launch. The lifter kicked up off the plane in a wash of dust, and Kech, who had never been off a moon in her life, watched Ostrich Thur fall away under her and clutched the arm of a bent old human she had, 6 days ago, mistaken for a broken thing. They did the 3 jumps in 19 hours. On the second jump, out beyond the dwarf star with no name, they were pinged by a Skarnvoth cutter and boarded by 6 of Ozul Rune's inner banner. Jet put down all 6 in the airlock corridor, which was 8 feet across and had no cover, in the time it took Kek to say, in her head, the small prayer her matriarch had taught her for children going into cold water. He used the rifle for 4 and the wrench for 2. When he was done, the corridor smelled of ozone and copper and burned meat, and he was leaning on the bulkhead, breathing shallow, and there was a fresh hole through his thigh that he had not had a minute ago. "That's bad," said Kek, looking at the hole. "It's a hole," said Jed. "Holes close." He limped to the airlock. He shut the outer door. He sat down on the deck against the bulkhead. He pressed the field weave against his thigh and told her, calmly, where in his kit to find the iron, and she heated it against a plasma torch from the toolbox. And she pressed it to his thigh 3 times with her small, hard orc child hands, because he had asked her to, and because she was learning that saying yes to him when he asked for the terrible thing was a way of loving him. He passed out for 6 minutes on the 3rd pass. He came back. He did not thank her. That was, she was learning, not his way. He said, "Little Belle." "Yes," she said. "Are you afraid?" he said. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "Fear is a tool. Don't drop it. It'll tell you when to move." She nodded. He said, "Listen. On the throat, in the hole, they will try to take you first. They will take you before they take me, because they will think that hurting you will break me. I need you to understand something. If they take you, I will not stop. I will not turn around. I will not put down the wrench. I will kill every last one of them in that hole, and then I will come get you. And if you are dead, I will bring you home to your matriarch, and then I will lie down and I will not get up again. But I will not stop. Do you understand?" She understood. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. "One more thing." "Yes," she said. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat over his heart, and he pulled out a small brass tag on a chain. The tag was warm from his body. He put it in her palm and closed her small hard fingers around it. "This has my name on it," he said. "It has my mother-in-law's address on it. If I do not come off the throat, I want you to find a ship that will take you to Terra, and I want you to give it to her. Her name is Ruth. She's my wife's mother. She lives in a cold city with a river in it. She will know what it means." Kech looked at the tag. It was very warm. "You have a wife," she said. "I had a wife," he said. She was quiet. She said, "I will bring it to her. Only if I do not come off the throat," he said. "Only if you do not come off the throat," she said. They said no more. The 3rd jump put them out 300 kilometers off the moon called the Throat, in the shadow of a comet. Jed disabled the beacon on the lifter and steered by sight. He put them down in the ice fields 9 miles west of the floating hole of Ozulrun, because the hole's coils did not scan the ice for cold objects, only for hot ones, and the lifter, after 19 hours of hard flight, was cold enough by then to look like a piece of the ice. They walked the 9 miles. They walked in silence. The wind on the throat was 70 kilometers an hour and full of small ice crystals that cut. Jed put Kech inside his coat, buttoned to the collar, and he walked into the wind with her weight against his chest. Because she was orc child small, and he was a large old human, and the coat had been designed for a heavy gravity soldier. And Kech, who had never been held by anyone but her own mother, put her face against the sternum of a very tired man and listened to a heart beating slow and steady under her ear, and she thought, without shame, that she would kill anyone in the galaxy who tried to stop that heart. They came up under the hole at the third watch of the throat's short night. The hole floated 400 feet above the ice on 3 columns of pale gravity light. There was a service stair inside one of the columns, because a warlord who never came down still needed servants who did, and Jed had known the plans of the hall since a long time before Ostrich Thur, from a file he had been given by a woman on a station he would never name. He had memorized the plans. He had drawn them from memory on the way station wall in charcoal for Kech 5 nights ago, and he had made her memorize them too. They went up the service stair. They went up 218 steps in the dark. Jed's thigh bled through the field weave twice on the way up. He did not stop. At the top of the stair, in the servants' antechamber, there were 2 guards. He took the first with the wrench and the second with a knife he had carried for 11 winters, and neither one made a sound. He set the wrench down on a stone bench in the antechamber. He wiped it clean on his sleeve. He looked at Kech, still inside his coat. He said, "This is the last part, little Belle." "Yes," she said. "You stay here," he said. "No," she said. "Kech," he said. "Uncle," she said. He was quiet a moment. He said, "You stay in the antechamber. You do not come into the hall. If anyone comes down the stair, you push this button here on the door, and the door will close, and it will not open for anyone but me. You wait until you hear the noise stop. When the noise stops, you count to 1,000. If I am not back by 1,000, you go down the stair, and you go west across the ice, and you take my tag to Terra. Do you understand?" She understood. She said yes. He set her down on the stone bench. He kissed the crown of her head once, in a way she would remember all her life without ever telling anyone. Then he opened the door into the hall of Ozulrun, and he went in. The hole was 70 paces long and 40 wide, and its floor and walls and ceiling were slabs of black glass grown from the same living reef the outriders wore on their chests. It was lit by pale cold light suspended in the vault. It was full of scanvote, 40 at least. Along the walls stood Ozulrun's inner banner in their black glass plate, plasma glaives at rest, the mark of the burned eye open on every chest. At the far end of the hall, on a low throne cut from a single slab of the reef, sat Ozulrun himself. He was 11 feet tall. He wore a mantle of white pelts. His tusks had been shod in gold. His eyes were the color of hot copper, and they had never in his life seen a small human bleed. Beside the throne stood 2 of the inner banner in the deep mark of veterans. These were the last 2 names in the ledger. One was called Vrek, the other was called Torul. They had held torches at Meridian Hollow. Jed had watched them do it 3 ridges away through a scope before his ammunition ran out and his heart broke into pieces small enough to swallow, and he had begun the long crawl to the place where the ledger was born. He walked into the hall of black glass with a lug wrench in one hand and a rifle over his shoulder, and he did not stop until he was 10 paces from the throne. He set the wrench down on the black glass floor. He did not put down the rifle. He looked up at the 11-foot warlord in the mantle of white pelts, and he spoke, in the Skarnvoth master tongue, in a voice so quiet the far end of the hall had to lean in. He said, "Meridian Hollow is here." The hall went silent, not the silence of surprise, the silence of 40 predators who have just understood that they are no longer at the top of the room. There is a difference. Kech, listening from the antechamber, could feel it through the stone. Ozulrun the warlord did not stand up. He did not need to. He put his gold-shod tusks together, and he leaned forward on his throne of black glass, and he looked down at the small bent human at the foot of his throne, and he said, in a voice like a landslide, "Little grandfather, I have been waiting for you." Jed said nothing. Ozil Rune said, "The scout Ves arrived 4 hours ago. He said the words you sent. I did not know the town. I have burned 300 towns. My scribes looked it up. Meridian Hollow, 11 winters ago, a dust hamlet on the far edge of the Nexus. 10 farmers, 3 families. My banner spent 40 minutes there. I do not, myself, remember it." He smiled around the gold on his tusks. "You do," he said. Jed said, "Yes. You have been hunting my banner for 11 winters," said Ozil Rune, "over a hamlet I do not remember. And now you have come to my hall alone, with a piece of iron and a farmer's rifle, and you have told me your name. Do you understand what a small thing you are asking of me?" "Do you understand how easy it is for me to grant it?" Jed said. "I understand." "Then kneel," said Ozil Rune. Jed said, "No." The two by the throne, Vrek and Tarul, moved half a pace forward. Jed said, "Before you kill me, warlord, hear one thing." Ozil Rune tilted his gold-shod tusks. "Speak," he said. Jed said, "Everyone in this hall thinks I am here to kill you." He looked around the hall. He looked at the 40 of the inner banner along the walls. He looked at Vrek and Tarul beside the throne. He looked back up at the 11-foot warlord on his slab of black glass. He said, "I am not here to kill you. I have already killed you. I killed you 6 days ago, on a road on a moon called Ostrik Thur, when I decided your name was next in the ledger. What is left in this hall is only the paperwork." The hall was silent. Then Azul Hoon laughed. He laughed for a long time. He laughed with his head thrown back, gold tusks in the cold light, and his 40 inner banner laughed with him, because they were his, and they had to, and the hall of black glass shook with the laughter of 41 very large predators in armor made of living reef, and Kek, in the antechamber, pressed her small hard hands to her ears. Then the laughter stopped. It stopped because a caliber 50 tungsten round had gone through the shield generator on Ozil Rune's chest, through the gold-shod tusks of Ozil Rune's mouth, through the back of the throne of black glass, and into the wall of the hall behind it, and Ozil Rune's laughter had come to a very abrupt end. Jed Ford lowered the rifle. He said, in the Skarnvoth master tongue, in the quiet register a wheelwright used to a wheel, "That was your last laugh. This is your last thought. Meridian Hollow says hello." Then the hall came for him. What happened next in the hall of black glass would be told in the market squares of 9 frontier moons for the next 100 years, and none of the tellings would agree. There was no witness in the hall who survived. There were 3 witnesses in the antechamber. 2 were dead within the minute. One, a small orc girl named Kech, watched through the crack in the door because she had been told to stay in the antechamber, and she had technically obeyed. But her eye was pressed to the crack the same way it had been pressed to the shutter in the loft above the wheelwright's shed 6 days ago, because if a Vorathar was going to see a thing, a Vorathar was going to see it. What she saw, she would tell all her life, the same way, without changing a word. She saw Vrek come first with a plasma glaive, and she saw Jed step inside the arc of the swing the way he had stepped in on the outrider in the market square, and she saw the wrench come up under the seam of Vrek's jaw the way it had come up under the outrider's jaw, and she saw Vrek fall in one piece the way the outrider had fallen in one piece, and she thought, with a small child's clarity, that a wheelwright learns his craft young and then does it the same way his whole life. She saw Torul come second with a bone axe. She saw Jed take the axe on his left forearm, which broke like a green stick in a fire but did not come off, and she saw him drive the wrench into Torul's temple with the offhand certainty of a man raised on a heavy gravity colony, and she saw Torul fall. Then she saw the 40 of the inner banner come from the walls, and she saw a very tired old human become, for 4 minutes and 18 seconds, something she did not have a word for. He moved slow. He was slow. He was old and he was hurt and he was bleeding from 3 places already, and he could not have outrun a walking child. And he still killed 9 of them in the first 30 seconds, because he did not need to outrun them, because he was standing at the foot of a throne in a hall 40 paces long, and he had a piece of iron in one hand and a rifle over his shoulder, and he had 11 winters of practice, and he had come here to close a ledger. The rifle ran empty on the 14th kill. He dropped it. He kept the wrench. He took a plasma glaive in the shoulder and did not stop. He took a bone axe in the thigh and did not stop. He took a shield bash to the face that broke his nose and knocked out 3 teeth, and he spat blood, and he did not stop. He moved through the inner banner of Ozulrun the way a mule goes through wet clay, slow and inevitable and impossible to divert, and every time he passed a body, he stopped for 1 breath to make sure it stayed a body, because he had learned on a road called Zaharam in a winter that was not this one, that a Skarnvoth in living reef could take 1 killing blow and get up smiling, but not 2. By the 3rd minute, there were 30 dead in the hall of black glass and 10 left standing. By the 4th minute, there were 38 dead and 2 left standing. The last 2 were young. They had joined the inner banner 3 months ago. They had watched their warlord die 4 minutes earlier, and their captain die 3 minutes earlier, and their comrades die one after another, with the offhand certainty of a wheelwright taking apart a broken wheel. And they had not run, because a Skarnvoth in the inner banner did not run. The last 2 dropped their glaives. They knelt. Kek, through the crack in the door, saw a very tired human sway in the middle of a hall of 40 dead, with blood running from his shoulder and his thigh and his face, and a piece of iron in his hand, and she saw him look at the 2 kneeling Skarnvoth, and she saw him do something she did not know he had left in him. She saw him stop. He stood in the middle of the hall of black glass, breathing hard, and he looked down at the 2 kneeling raiders, and he lowered the wrench. He said, in the Skarnvoth's master tongue, in a voice that was very tired, "Go home." The 2 kneeling raiders did not move. "Go home," he said. "Tell your children. Tell your children's children. Meridian Hollow is closed. Ozulrun is dead. The banner of the green teeth is finished. The old Wheelwright of Ostrictur says, do not come back to my part of the sky. Say it, all of it. Say it to your matriarchs. Say it to the outriders. Say it to the next warlord who thinks he wants to be Ozulrun. Do you understand?" They understood. They rose. They bowed once, the way Skarnvoth bowed only to their own warlord, and they backed the length of the hall of black glass and out the far door, and Kech in the antechamber heard the far door close, and then she heard the noise stop. She counted to 11. Then she went into the hall, because she was 12 years old, and last runner of the Vorosar clan Zulmuri. And if her uncle was going to die in a hall of black glass, she was not going to let him die alone, because that was not how a Vorosar was raised. He was on his knees at the foot of the throne. The wrench was on the floor beside him. He was breathing. She knelt in front of him. His face was a mess. His nose was broken, and his mouth was full of blood, and 3 teeth were on the black glass floor beside him, and his eyes were open, and they were very tired, and they were, for the first time since she had met him, at peace. "Little Belle," he said. "Uncle," she said. "Ledger's done," he said. "Yes," she said. He tried to smile. It hurt him. He did it anyway, he said. "I need a cup of coffee," she said. "I do not have coffee, uncle. I have water." "Water's fine," he said. He drank the water. It was mostly blood by the time he was done. She wiped his mouth with the tarry rag. He let her. He looked around the hall of black glass, at the 40 bodies and the empty throne and the gold on Ozulrun's dead tusks, and he said, in the trade cant so the last of the inner banner in the antechamber could hear him if any of them were still there, which they were not. "I did not come here for the treasury. I do not want the throne. I want a ride home and a cup of real coffee. And, for the record, in case anyone is wondering, I do not wash windows." Keck did not understand the joke about windows. She would understand it later. She would understand it 30 years later when a nephew of her clan asked her, at a hearth on Ostrich Thur, why the humans always said that line at the end of a fight, and she would tell him the story of the hall of black glass, and she would say, "It is a way the human says, I have done a big thing and I am small. It is how they lay the sword down. Do not ask me to explain it further. It is a human thing." That was 30 years away. Right now she was 12 and in a hall of black glass, and her uncle was bleeding out at her feet. She said, "Can you walk?" "No," he said. "I will carry you," she said. He looked at her. He was twice her size. He said, "Little Belle, you cannot carry me." "I can drag you," she said. "The floor is smooth." He laughed. He should not have laughed. It hurt. He laughed anyway. He said, "All right." She dragged him. She dragged him the length of the hall of black glass to the antechamber and down the 218 steps of the service stair one at a time and out onto the ice, and she found the lifter where they had left it under the comet's shadow, and she got him inside, and she closed the hatch, and she looked at the console which she had watched him operate for 19 hours, and she remembered the sequence he had run, and she ran it. The lifter kicked up off the ice. She flew the lifter herself. She had never flown anything. She flew it because he had told her at cold reel in the 5th minute of the launch, "The lifter flies itself. You just have to not lie to it. You point it and you tell it the truth about where it is and it goes." She pointed it. She told it the truth. It went. She did not fly it to Ostrich Thur. She did not fly it to the launch fields at cold reel. She flew it because the tag around her neck said so, and because he was slipping in and out of consciousness beside her and could not tell her not to. 3 jumps and 11 days to Terra. She landed the lifter badly in a Terran municipal port in a cold city with a river in it, and the port authority came out with weapons drawn to arrest her, and she got out with the tag in her hand and held it up, and she said in her best trade cant, "I am looking for Ruth Ford. This is her son. He is dying. Please." The port authority looked at the tag. The port authority looked at the small orc girl with the tag. The port authority radioed a woman named Ruth Ford, who worked as a records clerk in the archives of the extrasolar colonial militia and lived in a small apartment 11 blocks from the port. And Ruth Ford, who had been at her kitchen table pouring the second cup of coffee for a chair that had been empty for 11 winters, put the pot down without spilling a drop, and she said into the radio in the voice of a woman who had been waiting for this exact call for 11 winters, "I will be there in 9 minutes." She was there in 7. She did not scream when she saw the lifter. She did not scream when she saw the blood. She did not scream when she saw the small orc girl standing on the ramp with a brass tag in her hand and a look on her face that Ruth Ford would remember in the small hours for the rest of her life, because it was the look Sarah had worn the day she brought a lean young man with hard eyes home to the kitchen for the first time and said, "Mama, this is Jed." Ruth Ford climbed into the lifter. She saw a bent old man asleep in the pilot's chair with a piece of iron in his lap and 3 teeth missing and a face like a wet map. And she put her hand on his cheek and he opened his eyes. He said, "Ma." She said, "You took your time, son." He said, "Ledger's done." She said, "I know." She said, without turning her head, "Little one, what is your name?" "Kech." From the ramp said her name in the trade cant. She said, "Kech." Ruth Ford said, "That's not your true name." Kech looked at her. Kech said, 3 clicks and a low bell, without hesitation. Ruth Ford was quiet a moment. She said, "That's a very beautiful name, honey. Come inside. I made 2 cups of coffee this morning. One of them is still warm. You can have it. Your uncle can have the pot." Kech stepped down into the lifter. She took Ruth Ford's hand. It was a soft old hand, and it was warm, and it did not shake. They took him to a Terran hospital. He lived. He should not have lived. The Terran surgeon, who was a woman named Dr. Ines Vega, said afterward that his blood count was that of a man 3 hours dead, and that his heart was working on will alone, and that she had never in 29 years of trauma surgery seen a body take that much damage and go on running. She said this to Ruth Ford in the corridor outside the recovery room, and Ruth Ford, who was standing with a small orc girl asleep against her hip, said, without looking at the doctor, "He's Rilcard's reach. That's how they're built. You keep them stubborn enough, they don't die on schedule." The doctor did not know what Rilcard's reach was. She did not ask. Jed Ford spent 9 weeks in the Terran hospital. Keck spent 9 weeks in Ruth Ford's kitchen. She learned to make coffee. She learned to make toast. She learned to sit at a table with a bent old human woman and drink hot milk in the evenings, while a snow that Keck had never in her life imagined fell past the kitchen window in slow curtains onto a cold river. She learned that Ruth Ford's daughter had been named Sarah, and that Sarah had been 34 years old when the banner of the Green Teeth had come to Meridian Hollow, and that Sarah had had a baby girl in her arms, named Ruth after her grandmother, and that Sarah's husband, who had been Jed Ford, had come home 3 days late to a burned farm, and that he had eaten a plate of eggs standing up in this same kitchen, and drunk 1 cup of black coffee, and gone out the door with a rifle and a wrench, and had not come back for 11 winters. Keck understood on the 4th week why Ruth Ford had poured 2 cups of coffee every morning for 11 winters. She understood on the 5th week why Ruth Ford had not asked her son-in-law when he came in through the port that day where he had been or what he had done or how many. She understood on the 6th week why Ruth Ford that first morning had said, "One of them is still warm. You can have it. Your uncle can have the pot." She understood it because Ruth Ford that morning had known exactly who Keck was. Ruth Ford had opened the lifter, and she had seen the small orc girl on the ramp, and she had seen the small orc girl's face, and Ruth Ford had known, the way old women knew, that her son-in-law had walked into a hall of black glass on a moon called the Throat because a 12-year-old girl had asked him to fix her cart before nightfall. Ruth Ford had known this without being told. She had known this because she was Ruth Ford, and because she had spent 11 winters pouring coffee for a chair, and she had understood the moment she saw Keck that the second cup of coffee had, at last, found the person it had been waiting for. In the 9th week, Jed Ford came home from the hospital. He walked slow. He had a cane. He had 3 new teeth that were the wrong color because he had refused the whitening on principle. He came into the kitchen in a clean coat that Ruth Ford had bought him at a shop in the port, and he sat down at his old chair, and he looked at the 2 cups on the table, and he said, "Ma, who's the second cup for?" Ruth Ford, who was standing at the stove, said, "Same as it's been for 11 years, son." He looked at her a long moment. Then he looked at Keck, who was sitting in the chair across from his, wearing a Terran wool sweater 3 sizes too big, holding a mug of hot milk in both small hands. He said, "Little Belle." She said, "Uncle." He said, "You flew the lifter." She said, "Yes." He said, "Ma, she flew the lifter." Ruth Ford said, "I know, son. She told me. She wouldn't stop telling me. She's very proud of it, as she should be." Jed Ford laughed. He laughed the way an old man laughs when nothing hurts for a minute. He drank his coffee. It was hot and strong and had 1 lump of brown sugar in it, because that was how Ruth Ford made his coffee, and had made his coffee, and would always make his coffee. He set the mug down. He said, "Ma, I'm not going back." She said, "I know, son." He said, "I'm going to stay here. I'm going to fix wheels, Terran wheels, any wheels. I don't care." She said, "There's a shed in the yard. It's yours." He said, "I'm going to raise her." He nodded at Keck. Ruth Ford turned from the stove. She had a small folded handkerchief in her apron. She used it once at the corner of her eye. She put it back. She said, "We're going to raise her, son. Both of us. You cook the eggs." He said, "Yes, Ma." Keck, who had been listening with the mug pressed to her mouth so she would not have to speak, put the mug down. She looked at the 2 old humans in the little cold kitchen with the snow falling past the window onto the cold river. She looked at the second cup of coffee, which was hers now. and had, she understood, been hers for 11 winters before she was born, in the way old women knew things about the shapes of empty chairs. She said, in her best trade cant, "In the spring, I would like to go home for 1 moon. I would like to tell my matriarch." Rutherford said, "In the spring, honey, we'll all go, your uncle and me." "We'll bring the coffee," Kech said. "She will not know what coffee is." Rutherford said, "Then we'll teach her." That was how the story ended, if it had to end, which it did not, because a small orc girl who had been sent down a hill to buy an hour did in fact grow old, and did in fact become matriarch of the Vorathar clan Zulmuri in her own turn, and did in fact spend her long life telling the story the same way, without changing a word, from the market square of Ostrich Thur to the hall of black glass to the kitchen with the snow on the river, and the 2 cups on the table, and the old wheelwright who had put down the wrench and picked up an orc child, and who had, in the end, been very tired and had won anyway. She would tell the story to her children. She would tell the story to her children's children. She would tell it in her hearth tongue, and she would use the diminutive her uncle had used on her the first time he had spoken to her, and none of her listeners would ever be entirely sure whether they were listening to a true story or a legend, and Kech, watching them try to decide, would smile her flat orc's smile with her tusks polished and her eyes the color of a winter river on Terra. And she would say, in the trade cant her uncle had taught her, the line he had said that night in the kitchen with the snow falling past the window, in the same tired voice he had said it in, at the end of everything. She would say, "He did not look angry, he looked tired, and tired was worse." Then she would drink her coffee and she would go to bed. What a journey! And the moral, spoken plain, is this: the real weapon in a broken universe is not the wrench, and it is not the rifle, and it is not even the man who carries them, but the reason he decides, on a quiet morning in a wheelwright's shed, to pick them up one more time for somebody small who asked. If you loved this story, leave your like. It is the small thing that keeps these stories on the air, and it costs you nothing but a heartbeat. Share it with someone who also loves science fiction about a small human standing between something innocent and something enormous. Subscribe and turn on the little bell so you do not miss the next epic in the Humanity tradition. And tell me in the comments, because I want your honest answer. Would you have followed Jed Ford up the 218 steps of that service stair, or would you have stayed in the antechamber and counted to 1,000? Choose one. Say why. Keep your eyes on the empty dark out there, friend, and keep looking up at the stars.